Okay, back with another episode of Rethink Real Estate. We're going to continue on with our conversation with auction versus traditional. This example that I give you today and the conversation that I take you through is about the purest form of the benefit of auction. If you ask me for my one massive benefit of the auction process, this is what it is. Today, I take you through this circumstance and this individual situation where you can revitalize, literally give CPR to a listing, and bring back all the leverage back to the listing team's hands or into their perspective, because I believe that the auction process from a value standpoint, this is the most valuable thing that it brings to the real estate community. Take a listen. It's hard to follow along because I give examples. There's a lot of numbers, but hopefully this really resonates with you. Because again, as I said, this is my favorite thing about auction, full stop. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Continuing on with an earlier episode with auction versus traditional, I wanted to dive into the auction process in a marketplace that isn't moving as quickly. Now, I know that I've gone into a little bit of detail in a previous episode on the podcast in perspective to price reductions. This is similarly along those lines. And just to reiterate some of the points that I made in that episode itself is that, price reductions, I believe, are a public declaration of a seller willing to accept less. And the thing that I want people to realize in these situations in a traditional transaction is that it sucks all of the leverage that you have for your sellers out of the situation from a negotiation standpoint. Now, again, that's, just to clear things up when I go through things like this, is that there's one objective that I have when we have a listing or when there is an auction, is that you need to be doing the absolute best for your sellers. There was certain times that I've been questioned over the many, many times that I've ultimately been in negotiation situations. Now, if we were to go back to Australia and, me doing auctions and doing that live negotiation at the property on site, a buyer would say to me, well, hang on a second, you're just working for the sellers. We've got to make this work for everyone involved. And, I say to them, hey, look, obviously a deal comes together when I think both parties feel a little uncomfortable. Is that you feel a little uncomfortable when you've paid a little more and a seller might have accepted a little less than what they'd like. But my objective here today is to make sure that they win. That really is the objective. I don't think that this needs to be a win-win. I think that my objective here today is to make them win. And again, the reason I go into that is because I just always justified it with, if you're looking to sell your home, you would want me doing the exact same thing for you right now if I'm representing you. And they're our clients, and we're representing them to get them the most amount of money out of the transaction. So where I'm going with this from a listing side of the deal is that when it comes down to the auction process, I believe that it's about creating the most amount of leverage, even if you don't have any. So let's paint the picture and let's go through a situation. Let's say you've had a property on the marketplace. Now, again, I believe that the market is moving a lot quicker than what it used to in the perspective of perception. One, there's less inventory on the marketplace, so therefore there is more of a focal point on your particular listing, okay, more eyeballs. But two is that I think people's tolerance for how quickly they believe that the real estate marketplace moves over the last number of years and how quickly it has moved over those periods of time, that has got people thinking that, I had a conversation with somebody the other day that they said to me, my listing in an area of the US where $1.5 million should be a lot, and I mean a lot of money. It was in middle of America, and where the average sale price of a property is like $300,000 at best, and they had a $1.5 million property that was sitting there, and they're like, "Oh, I can't believe it's been on the marketplace for 14 days." And I literally said to them, "I'm like, I think it actually means that all is right in the world, that in your particular area, a $1.5 million property isn't moving within 14 days." So again, forgive me with the snobbery for a second, but realistically, I think that the buyers out there at the moment as well, and other agents that are obviously speaking to their buyers, are feeding into the perspective that after 14 days that a property sitting on the marketplace, what is wrong with it? Now, in that said, is that I just think that we have to be hyper conscious of that when we are the listing agent. And that's where I believe that auction is the absolute best process, hands down, for any transaction whatsoever. And this is the reason why I believe it to be, is because it gives you more leverage in the negotiation, even if you don't have a high volume of interest. Let's face it, guys, we should not live in a world where there is so much interest on every single property that you don't really have to do your job. Okay? Let's be honest, is that when it comes down to it, we're disappointed as realtors most of the time if a property doesn't move quickly, because it's not as easy for us. It's going to take us more time. Now, again, I might be saying that, and at the end of the day, it's a generalization. But again, digging deep down, is that I think that the disappointment of the property not moving as quickly as what we would like it to, can sometimes affect our judgment. Now, with the auction process, it allows us to have way more leverage, even if a property has not moved terribly quickly. Okay, so let's paint the picture of a traditional listing. Say that you've been on the marketplace for, let's call it 21 to 30 days. Okay, at that period of time, I would have liked to think that you've set your sellers up for a price reduction well before that, because as we know, is that after the first 7 days on the marketplace, the interest starts to decline. And I think that there needs to be a correction, or a conversation of a correction, within at least the first 14 days on the marketplace, knowing that particular sellers with particular real estate have to go through a process of elimination in their own right. I get that. Okay. However, when you do that first price reduction, just to be clear, and this is a statistic that we've shared previously on the podcast, is that when you do one price reduction, there is a 71% chance that you need 2 more before entering escrow. It becomes a very slippery slope, because that first price reduction typically isn't enough, because the agent in the first degree is overpromised and underdelivered. So therefore, you're pretty coy or timid around asking for a price reduction. That first price reduction isn't enough. By the time you get a second price reduction, where it's probably a little bit more, is that it's too little too late, and then the reputation has been tarnished from the property. And then again, you do another one in order to try and provoke even further interest, because the reputational damage on that property has been severe. Now, let's face it, guys. Let's say you've got a property on the marketplace. It's been on the market 30 days. You may or may not have done a price reduction. You have lost a great deal of leverage. When a buyer or a buyer's agent walks into that property, they know that they're the only person that ultimately could be interested in the property. And what are they going to do when it comes to making an offer if they're interested? They're going to send a lowball offer in. They're going to believe that they've got all the power in the negotiation. They're going to obviously try and get as many contingencies or terms that they possibly can on that deal. So therefore, you're automatically battling uphill. To reverse that into a situation where there's more leverage, okay, the nature of that, I just don't know how you dig yourself out of the hole. Now, some of you might have an idea of how you would do that, but I don't see a way of you doing it without creating this whole conspiracy around the factors of getting an investor to make an offer, or all of these different types of things. Realistically, when that time on the market has creeped up, or you've done a price reduction on that property, and it is not a multiple offer situation where people are jumping over themselves in order to make an offer, okay, which in the previous auction versus traditional episode, we went through how auction in a high-paced moving marketplace is always going to get more money than a multiple offer situation, because of the transparency that it ultimately creates. And we've got many case studies to prove that. But in this situation where that home is stagnant, where that buyer believes that they've got all the leverage in that negotiation, this is the time to bring a property through the auction process. Let me show you why, or let me explain to you why. Is that in that situation, let's say that you transition a property over to the auction process. You move it over to auction, okay, because you know that you've lost that initial momentum and any chance of leverage in a negotiation in order to get the best outcome for your client, okay? It moves over to auction. We have a low bidding to start from price on the property, much lower than what the property is worth or the seller's willing to accept. So first of all, I think you've done a great job of protecting your sellers. We go through this in the previous price reduction episode. It allows your seller's expectation to go behind closed doors, so therefore there's not a public declaration of them wanting to accept less or able to accept less later on, okay, those public price reductions or price increases or change in the valuation of the property or public value of the property, okay, that harms your ability to have leverage in the negotiation, full stop. Okay, any of those fluctuations. Now, when it comes to the auction process, we've dropped the price so low that it becomes irrelevant in the transaction. It becomes laughable that it would never actually sell for that. That's the dramatic effect of it. So therefore, we get them focusing on the property specifically. The next element of this as well is that let's say you don't have an overwhelming amount of interest when you transition the property over to an auction. It doesn't have a really big pop. It just creates a little bit more attention on the property, but still nobody's overly committed to the home. Maybe because of the situation, the location, the particular floor plan of that property. There's many, many reasons that could be. It could be market driven entirely as well, but I don't believe that. I think the market is between your eyes, and in essence is that I believe that you can create hype in any market that you're ultimately in if you use the right strategy to do so. That said, is that let's say that you're not overwhelmed with the volume of interest, you don't have people tripping over themselves to make offers prior to auction, but you have some good interest. Now, one person steps to the plate as they normally do, okay? About 98% of all buyers who end up participating in our auction properties will try and make an offer before auction to stop the auction. People don't want to be in an auction if they don't have to be, but that creates wonderful insight for us for feedback, wonderful insight to what their capacity is as a buyer, and also creates, again, leverage, folks. Let's say that on our auctions, 97% of them receive an offer prior to auction. Regardless of whether that offer stops the auction or it doesn't stop the auction, it creates leverage where we can make phone calls when we're following up with people, letting them know that, hey, we have an offer on the property. It may or may not stop the auction. Are you interested? People are interested in things that other people want. It creates a level of interest. It gets them thinking, oh, well, maybe I missed something on that property. Maybe I need to go back. Now, the other part of this, it also creates leverage in your conversation. Ring, ring, ring. Hi, this is Ben Brady speaking. Hi, Ben. We're interested in the property at 28 Smith Street. Oh, okay, guys. Just before we go any further, I do have an offer on that property prior to auction day. It may or may not stop the auction. So we need to get you into the property ASAP so that you don't miss out. Immediately changes the pace of which they're thinking about this, immediately changes the leverage in that conversation, that it's gone from that buyer knows that the home's been on the marketplace a period of time and they can take all the time they want in the world. They can make whatever offer they want. It changes that into, oh, geez, okay, well, all right, well, we'll get there and we'll make some decisions. And okay, if they are a serious buyer, they'll take action. Now, that said, it obviously allows those conversations, as mentioned, gives better leverage, gives better control over that. Now, let's say that one person steps up and places an offer prior to auction. That's a good offer, a decent enough offer that we can work with. Now, the situation that I'm thinking of is a property that we had in Fair Oaks Drive in San Francisco. This is a property that was on the marketplace for 75 days as a traditional sale. It was listed at $1,275,000. For those that know what this is, it was a TIC, okay, which is a particularly difficult sector to sell within San Francisco because it's different financing rules, and it's not as straightforward as just your standard condo, standard, single family home individual sale. Okay. So there's a little bit of complexity to it. So automatically it's a little bit uphill from putting that property on the marketplace. Now, this situation, we put the property on the marketplace at a bidding to start from at $1 million. So it was on the market at $1,275,000. We changed the bidding to start from to $1 million. Now, again, lowering to a point that this was a beautiful property, okay, and a beautiful opportunity for somebody, and it was very attractive at that price point. So we got a great deal more interest in. But because of the TIC situation, a few little quirky things about the area as well, okay, is that in essence, we didn't have people tripping over themselves to make offers to try and stop the auction or anything along those lines. But we did get one buyer in that put an offer in prior to auction at $1.1 million. Now, we're $175,000 away from where that property was previously listed. The seller obviously wanted a little bit more money than that, to make it worthwhile. When somebody transitions over to auction, there's always a little bit more hope that they're probably going to get more money through the competitive nature of what there is. It's not meaning that they're being greedy. They just want to obviously set their expectations. They wanted around 1.3. They would have accepted around 1,275 to 1,250. That was where it really had the conversation. So 1.1 million is the offer they put in. Now that offer was contingent to home inspection, was contingent to financing, it was contingent to all these different things. Okay, so it had some hair on the deal, so to speak. But one of the things that we could do now, let's be clear here, guys. We didn't have anybody else interested in this property. But the one thing that the auction allowed us to do was get an offer prior to auction day because of this allure or this whole competitive perspective of what auction is. They said, hey, look, we don't want to be in competition on auction day. Literally were the words from the agent that submitted the offer. So we're putting an offer in to stop the auction. We don't want to do the whole auction thing. Great. Most people think that isn't the auction process working. It absolutely is, because the date and time of an actual event, a physical event, okay, that will happen was the push in order to get there. And the perception is that there's going to be an overwhelming amount of competition on that day, regardless of whether we do or we don't. So therefore, we leverage on that opinion always. Okay. So we went back to them and said, guys, at the moment, that offer is not enough to stop the auction. So therefore, there's one of two things that you can do. You can register to bid for auction day and put your hat in the ring, or you can increase your offer to stop the auction. Agent said to us, well, would you give us a counter? No, we're not going to give you a counter prior to auction day. We're not going to have an auction before an auction, so to speak. So you guys, again, just register to bid if you're not comfortable increasing upon yourselves in order to stop the auction. They came back with another offer, $1,150,000 at this point. And we went back and said, hey, look, guys, really quickly we went back to them. Look, really appreciate it, but we're just not in the same atmosphere of where you guys see this property being versus what we believe that we could probably get for this property come auction day. So please either resubmit or register to bid, or this might not be the property for you. Thanks so much. Okay. Now, again, in a typical traditional situation, you would have sent a counter offer out at probably 1,325 and blown this buyer completely out of the water, because their budget really was about $1.2 million before it was where it stood. Auction brings people in that don't have the budget, and then obviously they bring. They increase their budget once they've seen something that they want, because most people want to try and buy logically in the beginning of their search, and then it becomes emotional on that transition. Hopefully this is making sense so far, guys. A lot of numbers, a lot of things to follow. Hopefully you can keep along, because this is I think one of the most strongest points about the entirety of the auction process. Okay. It's actually why I love this process, because it's so malleable in all markets. And I believe that we actually spend 70% of our time in the marketplace where people aren't tripping over themselves to try and buy real estate. So keeping on with the story is that 1.2 was their actual budget. Okay. So therefore we just went back to them and said, guys, you're going to have to put another offer in if you want to try and stop the auction. It has to be better than that, guys. You've got to put something serious in here. They're like, well, what do we need to be at? Guys, I can't give you any indication of what that is based on the non-disclosed reserve price, but give me an idea where you would max out on this property. Okay. Well, 1.2 is our budget. I think you'll have a lot of competition for this property at that level, guys. Okay. So that's my answer to that. Well, what do we need to be at? Okay. They actually end up putting an offer in at $1,250,000, which we knew that the seller would accept at that point. A little bit begrudgingly, but we went back and pushed a little bit harder again. Okay. We ended up getting him to $1,275,000 for that property. Okay. $1,275,000. It was previously listed at $1.275. Okay. So we technically got a full ask if we're using that terminology. Now, this is where auction really plays to the benefit. I think price is great, but the likelihood of this deal closing when you've got appraisal contingency, finance contingency, you've got home inspection contingency, you've got TIC document contingency, all of these things. And I went back to them at this point. Now, keep in mind, nobody else interested. Don't get me wrong. We had followed up everybody. We'd made the phone calls. We've got an offer prior to auction. It may or may not stop it. Nobody's interested in this property apart from these people. I went back to them at this point. I said, guys, look, I feel really uncomfortable as the advisor when it comes to auction, stopping the auction and ruining our momentum in our process. When there is a pretty high likelihood that your deal could fall out of escrow. Oh no, we have every intention of moving forward with it, blah, 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 blah. Guys, we've done all the home inspections and all the reports up front. We're not going to be okay with inspection contingencies. You guys have to do your own due diligence, and you have to remove that contingency if we're going to stop the auction. Also, appraisal contingency. At the end of the day, you guys are putting a decent amount of down from a financing perspective. What does it matter if it appraises or it doesn't? At the end of the day, we don't want that in as a contingency perspective. Okay. So I can't stop the auction for that either. And then, the TIC documents, obviously they're already drafted, Anyway, we went back and we pushed back on the terms. We got a completely non-contingent deal, and we stopped the auction, and we got 1,275,000 for the seller, and non-contingent. Money hits escrow. Again, we stopped the auction, and that is, I believe, an unbelievable success story. I think that is almost more of a success story than the auctions that we have with 6 or 7 or 8 registered bidders and it goes flying off the handle and it's just crazy. That's easy, guys. Just makes sense. It's just actually common sense working in that situation. But being able to creatively bring the leverage back to a property that had been on the marketplace for a period of time and in a position and not the greatest attributes of all the properties just all not meshing together, okay? And being able to leverage that into a unbelievably successful result, I believe that is the purest form of why this process is absolutely unbelievable. Thanks so much for listening. Love to answer any questions. If you've got them, just reach out, ben.brady@harcourtsauctions.com, and happy to set up a conversation if you think this would be helpful for a particular listing that you've got at the moment. Thanks so much. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.